right, Art22, welcome back. Today is a day, that's a deep statement. Today is the day we are going to talk about the if statement. This is part of a concept in computer science and in logic for that matter called a conditional. And it's, in some ways it's kind of intuitive actually. It's basically like, if this happens, then do this. If I'm tired, then make coffee. And that's pretty much what we're going to be doing in our code. Not making coffee, but, that kind of logic. If you do make a processing sketch to make coffee, let me know as soon as possible, please. Okay. So what our goal is today is we are going to make a sketch that that uses conditionals, that uses if statements to draw differently depending on where we are in the screen. So last lecture we saw that we can change the color, the outline, the fill, the transparency, which shape we're kind of drawing. So we already have a lot of things to work with, but now we want them to be a bit more dynamic. And so we're going to change some of those parameters just by virtue of where we are drawing them on the screen. So let's take a quick sketch of what this is going to look like. All right, so let's say this is our processing screen. There's our little buttons at the top. Okay. So let's say that we want to divide our screen into 4 quadrants. Okay. There we go. All right. So here's what our goal is going to be. We want the behavior of our shape, of our, let's call it our brush, whatever we're drawing with. We want our brush to change depending on the location that we're drawing in. So for example, if our shape was here, let's say then it would be something like blue and, let's just stick with color. Then maybe we zoom over here and now we're going to be green. We zoom down here and we're going to be red. We zoom over here and we're going to be black. So that's the goal for today. And so we're going to see that just using if statements, we're able to get this behavior relatively easily. Now, one thing I want to say before we jump into it is that anytime you're coding and you sort of know kind of what you want to do, but you're having a hard time just getting started with the actual coding part, there's this idea called pseudo code that can be a very helpful idea. And so basically what that means is it's like write out what you want to do kind of more in normal English language and less code. So let's think about what we might want to do pseudocode wise for what we just discussed. So for example, here we have our, let's say we want to draw our shape blue when we are in that top left quadrant of our screen. So let's think about the aspects of that. So if we're in the top left, let's think about position for a minute. If we're up in this top left section of our code, what does that mean for the X position of our code? So X here, well, we learned last time that we can divide our code using that width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. That kind of what tells us what the boundaries are. So here, that is our width. Wow, that's barely English. Width divided by 2. This is our height divided by 2. Okay, so this is the boundary that we need to be working in. So let's just think about this if statement in kind of plain language. So let's say if, how about we say shape, actually we're calling it a brush, right? So let's stick with that. So if brush X position is less than width divided by 2, and if brush Y position is less than height divided by 2. So we're going to see that that's actually fairly close to how we're going to write this in code, but as at least right now, it kind of makes sense in language, right? Like if we want to know when our shape, or our brush, excuse me, is in the top left quadrant, then we know that by virtue of it being in the left and top quadrant, that its x position is less than width divided by 2, and its y position is less than height divided by 2. So let's go ahead and start coding, and this will help us kind of think through how we're going to actually write the syntax of this code to make this happen. All right, let's jump in. All right, so here we are, a blank processing sketch. That might be a terrifying thought, or it might be a great opportunity, depending on your outlook. So let us go ahead and put in the standard things we always put in, right? We always are going to have a void setup. We're always going to have a void draw. There we go. And let's go ahead and give it a size. I've been doing this whole 600 by 600 thing for a while. Let's do it one more time. And that's, I think, all we need to do for our setup. Now, let's do this. From our lecture last time, let's get in place a shape that is associated with our mouse position. So what I'm going to say is, let's draw a point at mouse X, mouse Y. And if you remember, the thing that gives points their size is the stroke weight. So let's say the stroke weight is 30. Okay. So let's just run that and make sure everything is happy. Okay, there it is, cool. So by default, we ended up with a black stroke because we didn't specify. And we have the kind of boring processing gray, sorry, processing, but in the background. Let's go ahead and draw a background so we're just seeing one shape at a time, just the current position of our brush. So I'm going to say background. I'm tired of white. Well, let's just stick with white. It makes the colors a bit more clear. Okay. Let's make sure that's good. Okay, now we are drawing our circle, just the current position, because remember we're clearing everything that happened before with that background function. Okay. So here's what we got to do. Now we got to implement this whole idea of the if statement in our conditional. So I'm just going to go ahead and give you the syntax for this, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. So we decided from our little sketch here at the beginning that we need to know when the x position of our brush is less than width divided by 2. So when it's on the left side of our screen. So we can say if mouse x, because mouse x, remember, is what our position is for the point. So if mouse x is less than, that's the sign for less than, width divided by 2. Okay, so that first part's good. But now we said that we also need to check for when the y position of our brush, so our mouse y. So how can we do that? So one thing we can do is use 2 ampersands to say and. So this is basically code for and. So we're going to say if mouse x is less than width and mouse y is less than height divided by 2. And the parenthesis. Okay, so there's our if statement. If mouse x is less than width divided by 2, so if it's on the left side of our screen, and mouse y is less than height divided by 2, so it's on the top of our screen, just by process of elimination, we are going to be in our top left quadrant. And if that's the case, then we need to do something. So let's figure out how that works. So we're going to put a set of curly brackets here. Leave some space. Okay. So basically whatever goes inside of here between these curly brackets, that is the then part. So if this is true, then whatever happens inside here actually happens. So we said in that initial sketch that we wanted, if this were true, if we're in the top left quadrant, that we're going to draw blue. So what we can say is stroke RGB, so we're going to say 0, 0, 255. Okay, so red, green, blue. So we have full blue value if we are in this quadrant. Okay, let's just go ahead and test this to see if that's working. Well, that's a good sign. So what's going on here? So it is working, but the problem is we're not changing the color to anything else when it's anywhere else. So we set the stroke blue when it was here, which is true, but since we're not changing the stroke color anywhere else, it's just going to stay blue. So we need some more if statements to make sure that we are changing the color when we're in other sections of our screen. So let's go ahead and get that going. So let's focus on the top right quadrant of our screen. So we can kind of do the same thing. We can say, give a comment here. Are we in the top left quadrant? Okay. Now let's look at that top right quadrant. If. So let's look at our mouse X position again. So if mouse X, this time since we're on the right of the screen, we want to know when we are greater than width divided by 2. So when we are on the right side of the screen. So if mouse X is greater than width divided by 2, and now let's look at our mouse Y. Mouse Y, we still want it to be on the top, so we can still stick with height divided by 2. Let me get all the other little bits in here. Okay, so we're saying if mouse X is on the right side of our screen and mouse Y is on the top of our screen. So are we in the top right quad? If that's the case, I think we said we wanted it to be green. So I'm going to say stroke RG. So we'll say 0, 255, 0. Boom. Not curly bracket, semicolon. So now we're going to be green. All right, so let's hope that that is working. All right, blue, 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 green. Okay, cool. So that is working how we want right now. So let's get these last two in here. And just to make our lives a little easier, I'm going to copy this, paste it down there. One note, if your code gets a little bit funky, like things are kind of out of alignment, and you're like, oh, this is so ugly and I can't do anything about it, Command T is your friend. It's basically a way to auto format your code. Highly recommend it. It'll keep your code straight and your brain straight as well. Alrighty, so we need to now let's look at the bottom right quadrant. So in this case, bottom right, we still want mouse X to be on the right side, which is greater than width divided by 2. But now we want to be on the bottom half of our screen, so it needs to be if mouse Y is greater than height divided by 2. Are we in the bottom right? If so, I think we had said we want it to be red, 5, 0, 0. And last but not least, Command T. I love Command T. Okay. Mouse X. We now want to be on the left side of the screen, so we're going to go back to less than width divided by 2. And we are going to stay on the bottom with mouse Y being greater than height divided by 2. So bottom, left. Cool. And we said we wanted it to be black. All right, let's see if all of this has paid off. All right, blue, green, red, black. Blue, green, red, black, blue, green. All right, sweet. That is working perfectly. All right. So this is all well and good. Works perfectly. Happy. However, there are some ways that we can elaborate, and also actually maybe a better way to say it is make more efficient the way we're doing these conditionals. So right now we have a separate one for each one. But if anyone's ever done any like logic stuff, we know that kind of a corollary to if is the idea of else. So what we can do is we can kind of compact this whole thing a little bit more, make it a bit more efficient by saying, okay, if this is true, if we are in the top left quadrant, do this. Great. Else, so basically if that's not true, do this. Else, boom. If that is true, then do that. Else, do that. Else, do that. Okay. And Command T. So this is just a bit more, I guess in this case, not super efficient, but at least it kind of keeps them together as a unit. So we're checking for this. If that's not true, then we do this. If not, then we do that. If not, then we do this. So if and else tend to go together quite a bit. So this works well when you have multiple things, but you could imagine that if you just had two things to look at, like two conditions you were checking for, you could say if the first condition is true, do something. Otherwise, else, do something else. And you wouldn't even need a second if statement. So let's look at that right now. I'm going to put a comment around all of this. And I need to get rid of this one. Okay. So let's look at an example where just saying if and else is all that we need. So we're going to make a little bit of like a, I don't know, like a flag design almost. We're going to separate our screen into 3 parts. So instead of checking for 4 quadrants, we're going to look for 3 different sections. Let's make a quick drawing of what we're looking at here. Okay, so here we go. We got our new window. And instead of having the 4 quadrants like we had before, we want to divide our screen into 3 sections like that. All right, so how can we do that? So let's think about this. If we need to be in this part of the screen, then we can know that the mouse X position is less than whatever this is here. Let's say that's 200 pixels. So if X is less than 200 pixels, we know that we're on this side of the screen. If X is between 200 and let's say 400, then we know that we're somewhere in this part of the screen. And then if mouse X is greater than 400, we know that we're on this side of the screen. So we're going to see a way that we can make a pretty efficient if statement to check if we are on either this side of the screen or this side of the screen and do something. And if that's not true, so if we're in here, then we're going to do something else. So So let's take a little bit of a look on how we can get that going. Okay. So we're just checking for mouse X this time. So I'm going to say if mouse X, and we had said 200 was that first boundary. So if it's less than 200, so if we're on that left third of the screen, that's our first condition. Now we also want to know the other option that we want to do is if we're on the far right. So what we're getting after here is if I'm on the far left of the screen or the far right of the screen, I want to draw in one color, or if I'm in the middle of the screen, I want to draw in a different color. So just like before where we used these two ampersands for and, we can use two vertical lines, which is shift and slash right above your enter key. We can use two of those to be, that is the operator for or. Actually, if you highlight it, it shows you some information about it. Cool. Okay, so now we're saying if our mouse X is less than 200, if it's on that left third of the screen, or if mouse X is greater than 400. So now we've used one conditional to check for the left and the right third of the screen. If that's true, we want to set our stroke to, let's say, red. Cool. And now, because we only need to check between two things, we're either on the left or the far right, or we're in the middle, now we can just say else, else, do something else. So in this case, why don't we say we will paint white if you're in the middle. 255, 255, 255. All right. So here's where you can see a bit more clearly why if and else can be pretty convenient together. Because basically we're like, all right, are we on the left third or the far right third? Great, let's go red. But if not, we don't really care what the specifics are. We just know if we're not in these two, boom, then let's go white. All right, let's check that out. All right, left, middle, invisible, right. Whee! Okay, cool. So let's do something a little more interesting with this as the last thing today. I'm gonna cancel out our background. And I'm gonna increase our stroke weight to, how about twice as big, 60. And now we can see, maybe, you know what, I'm gonna give it a little bit of a alpha channel here. I want a little bit of transparency. So how about 100? Yeah. Let's run this now. So now we have a painting program that's gonna give us, I guess, a Canadian flag. But it's basically gonna give us some dynamic drawing behavior based on where our mouse is on the screen. Maybe we could tweak this more and make the transparency even less. In fact, let's do that. Let's go with something really faint, like 40. Oops. And let's give our white transparency as well, now that we have a different background color. 40. All right, there we go. Got some cool transparency. Ooh, there we go in the middle. That looks cool. Over here on the right, getting a very kind of like modernist, minimalist Canadian flag. I'm not from Canada, so I don't know exactly why this is happening, but that's okay. All right. Okay. So that is all for today. That is the if statement. Let's take a quick recap here. So first we set up a 4-quadrant set of conditionals, basically checking for each quadrant. And if any of those were true, then we changed to a different stroke color. And then we used a straight if and else statement to decide that are we on the far left or the far right? If so, let's go red. And if not, if we're anywhere else, then draw it white. All right, so your homework will be posted on the website. You're going to be making a dynamic drawing system, so you can use any primitives that you want, any colors that you want, any kind of behavior that you want. Use as many conditionals as you want, and just get a little creative and see what kind of things you can come up with. And we will catch you next week. Good luck, everyone.